In this, our 100th episode, we dig into a conversation about the holiday of Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av, and its commemoration of the Jewish people's collective trauma and grief.
This is Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracie,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin and Tracie Guy Decker.
In a complex world, change takes courage.
Wholehearted relationships can keep us accountable.
Hi, Tracie.
Hey, April.
Hi, friend listening in. We're so glad that you're here. Do you know what this episode is? Maybe you saw when you tuned in. Maybe you didn't. But it is our, what episode is this, Tracie?
Number 100.
Number 100! Y'all ready for this? We made it to 100, baby!
Oh, man.
Woohoo! And boy, has it been a journey.
For reals.
And we're also getting pretty close, which makes perfect sense. We should be about 2 weeks out, precisely, from our 2-year anniversary, or 4 weeks out, I guess, from our 2-year anniversary since we launched. So this is just a lovely, special time. I want to especially thank you, listener, who has been listening from the beginning and or very early on. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing our podcasts, for weaving the perspective and analysis that we share into your life and leadership. And also much love to you, newer/newest listener who is just joining us for the first time on this episode or in the last few weeks or couple months. We're so glad to have you on this journey with us. And I think it would be nice for us to share some of the things, some highlights, either some memories and or favorite episodes, or just themes in general, or attributes about the podcast that we've loved and appreciated to date that would be worth just naming and acknowledging. And also, as we're sharing some of these things, if you have any ideas, wonderful, lovely listener, about things that you have particularly enjoyed, I welcome you to either share this episode and or visit iTunes and leave us a review. That would be really awesome. We have a few great ones, but we haven't solicited them in a while. And so as you're listening to either some of these reflections we share and or some of the juicy content we're going to dive into this week, and it sparks some appreciation for you, we would so appreciate if you stopped by and gave us a review and shared some of what you most appreciate about Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracie. So I think one of the things that comes to mind for me, so the first and obvious one is just about our rapport and connection and all of the ways that that has been a wonderful, enriching element of my life over the past 2 years.
Yeah. Amen.
Right? So there's that part, I think. But I think beyond that, because in some ways that's both sacred and treasured and kind of obvious, something that might be a little less obvious that is really meaningful. And I think in some ways I take it a little bit for granted, but it's sacred and rare, is that since it's self-produced, one of the things I love about Jews Talk Racial Justice is that it's not censored.
Yeah.
Is that there's no mainstream institutional publication, organizational media room where folks say, Tracie, when you told that story, I think it would be better if you told a milder story, or April, so that was really brave, but I wonder if you could, I'm trying to think of what are some of the things I've heard in the past, because I don't want to make it heavy-handed. I want to make it very realistic. Could you not mention Israel, Palestine? Could you, whatever it might be. I'm like, I can't think of examples right now because it's not how my brain works. I've only been on the receiving end of it.
Right.
Yeah, please
right.
help me here.
Right. The ones that I have heard that from different iterations were like, I don't know though. Is it good for the Jews for you to be talking about this? Is it good for the Jews, Tracie? That's the question that like always sort of stops me in my tracks, because I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Uh, is it? I mean,
Clearly, I thought so since I said it.
It was good for this Jew. Yeah, get that one. That one comes a lot. I have heard that one a lot in my like mainstream Jewish circles. When we were talking about what exhibits we might do for the museum, we were talking about like how hard to, when I was pushing hard to follow the lead of Black and brown Jews and others who, you know, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, like, is it good for the Jews? Which I think the thing that bothers me the most about this question is that the person asking always thinks they know the answer, as if they are the arbiter of what's good for the Jews. Which I think that's the thing that bothers me the most about it.
Yeah. And so I really appreciate that we've created, I think, a pretty nuanced, balanced container that has elements of courage and honesty and deep compassion and love and the different engaged perspectives that we both bring from different vantage points in conversations, and that we've done that a range of different times around a variety of different subjects, some more easeful, such as holidays. Sometimes we integrate easeful with complex concepts. Like I really loved the piece we did this year around the time of Pesach about, and not that this is original, but looking at it through our unique, distinctive lens. It's not original, but it's also not very common, about what if in different cases we are the Egyptians? Mm-hmm. How do we think about the story, right? Like asking these questions and doing so with a sense of freedom and confidence, and also a deep commitment to integrity and responsibility around the impact and implications of our words and analysis. Are there any reflections that you want to share, Tracie, either related to what I said or along a different thread?
I mean, it's not unrelated, though. It's not precisely what you were saying, but I think one of the things that I really love about the way that we approach things, beyond just, you know, the rapport that we love one another, but
yes.
Is the way that we are able to learn from one another, and even sometimes disagree without it being about who's right. You know, I feel like you nuance my thinking, and sometimes I'm able to nuance your thinking as well, without being like, no, you're wrong, but just being like, what about this piece of it? And then we're able to like kind of chew on it together as a collaborative conversation, as opposed to the ways that we were taught out in the world to have these conversations, which was
and
much
that are
more
commonplace patterns that
like,
show up,
that are very commonplace, that's about persuading or sometimes just steamrolling over the other person to prove that you are right. I don't think there's any of that happening when you and I talk, even when we are not completely aligned.
In alignment. Agreed. Yeah, totally. That resonates deeply with me, Tracie. And I think part of it is because emanates from us having an understanding of deep respect for one another, and understanding and appreciating and holding an awareness of the multiplicity, the reality of a multiplicity of human experiences, and basically having a neutral and or warm reception to difference, and not making difference wrong, and not having the thought error where difference implies that you think I am wrong, because that's at times what happens in these exchanges, where there's a difference of opinion, and then people, either for likely at times probably from a lack of confidence or any number of different things, project onto that person that in addition to their perspective, they're also a scarcity
Judging.
mindset that there can only be one. And if that person is articulating their thoughts well, the person feeling danger, and we just don't go
There's
down
also
that thought
like
path.
completely related, or maybe a different way to say that is that there often is a competition aspect.
Exactly.
These
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
That's a different word for it, but there's no competition between us, and because I'm much more interested in a greater, deeper understanding and analysis than I am in
Same.
besting anyone.
Right.
And so I think that, having us both come in with that attitude rather than trying to, be the best.
Well, and what that points out what we've talked about before on the show, I often feel like you bring it up, but I think I brought it up too, or aligned around this, is there's less competition in the context of having a growth mindset, that we're not in a place of being fixed. And we understand, as you already said, that we're dynamic people with dynamic analyses that are continually evolving and adjusting and shifting. And in that context, there's also not a need for as much competition, because we get to be flexible. And there's a lot more we could say here. And I think that's good for now, because I'm kind of eager to transition into some of the theme of what we wanted to talk about today. Okay, cool. And which is that we are coming up on, in a matter of days, by the time this is published, Tish B'Av. And then shortly after that, a week later, we have Tu B'Av coming up.
Sure.
I feel like with the way your brain works, you can do that more effectively than I can.
Happy to do so. Thank you. So Tish B'Av, which literally means the 9th of Av, which is the Hebrew month we are currently in, is associated with all of the tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people. So it is the date on which the first temple was destroyed. It is the date on which the second temple was destroyed. It is said among some that it is the date on which the final solution was articulated for the first time in Nazi Germany. So the decision to actually exterminate Jews is also associated with Tish B'Av, and there are many others. I mean, those are sort of like the ones that stick out, but it is sort of like the terrible, no good, very bad day in the Jewish calendar. So it is a day for mourning and lamentation and soul searching, and just and there's a fast. So it is a deep day where we sort of pile all of our communal and intergenerational trauma onto that day to be recognized. How's that for a
amazing? That was great.
Great.
I was going to start to go into theoretical. That was perfect. I was going to go into theory land with it. And so we've brought significant trauma-informed analysis to many of our episodes. And I really want to talk about it and accentuate it today in a very specific sort of way, in terms of going broad view around my sense of what is needed for Jewish liberation, thriving, and healing, and an advancement of our people and the different peoples that make up our Jewish people, in a way that is something that is healing and feels true and inspiring for us, while also being accountable to not only ourselves, but the world within which we live, and more specifically, folks who are as and or more marginalized than we are. My very real sense is Jews, like a range of other people, and specifically it takes on specific permutations and manifestations for the Jewish people. My sense is, in terms of, we were talking about the positive elements of what we love about our podcast and what Tracie and I have cultivated and share with each other. And to me, one of, if not the core reason why those are achievements that are more difficult for our broader community, is because we have yet to get receive and or marshal the deeper support we need to more significantly address and heal from our collective trauma. And so we're going to focus, as I said before, on Tish B'Av this episode, but I think what I'm thinking right now, and I might change my thought in a day or in a couple months, is that I could sum up to me the experience of the Jewish people could be tidily wrapped up in a 3-part bow of what is held within Tish B'Av, what Tu B'Av represents around love and sharing love, and our pursuit of justice, our pursuit of teshuva v'tikkun, of returning to our divinity, of engaging in apologizing for things we have been a part of, or taking account for the ways we are complicit in oppression, and also engaging in tikkun, in healing ourselves and the broader world, engaging in tikkun olam, of making this world a better place. To me, that, and obviously there's so much more to say, but that is one way that I would describe the arc of the Jewish people to date, is immense, immense adversity and trauma over thousands of years. Us, in spite of that, building a gorgeous, robust, beautiful set of cultures and communities all over the globe that are filled with love and artistry and joy, and being committed to consistently helping our neighbor and bettering the societies and broader communities within which we live, not only for ourselves, but for the betterment of everyone, and wanting to coexist peacefully in partnership with our fellow Jews as well as our neighbors, and not needing them to shift, but actually really believing, from my biased Jewish perspective, believing in a healing that enables us to be who we are and enables other folks with whom we are in relationship and helping to be who they are, and to be able to articulate that, and for our service simply to be supporting them in their becoming as they in their community see it as helpful, as opposed to other societies or certain religious or spiritual communities that have oppressive elements around needing everyone to be like them in order to be worthy of healing and love.
Yeah. So Tu B'Av, the middle of your tripartite bow, Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, is a holiday that I was completely unaware of until probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Same.
Yeah. So, and
I don't even think it was 10 years ago for me. I think it was like
maybe
6 or 5 years ago for me. Back to you.
Working at the museum. So, it's somewhere in the last, 6 to 10 years. So Tu B'Av was described to me initially as the Hebrew Valentine's Day, which is not, I know,
Right.
like, I hate describing holidays in that way. And also, my birthday is Valentine's Day.
Really?
And so there was a little, like, it does resonate a little bit for me personally, even though I, in general, I do not like saying that,
right.
like,
This is the Jewish Christmas.
I hate it when people describe Hanukkah as the Jewish Christmas. Exactly.
Yeah.
Hate that.
No.
It just erases difference and nuance.
Among other things. Yeah.
Where I was going with this before I got distracted by my birthday is that I think it's really interesting that Tu B'Av, which is a celebration of love relationships, is less than a full week after Tish B'Av, right? So we have the 9th of Av and the 15th of Av. And there's something that feels really significant to me, since we are a culture that thinks in weeks, 6 days and Shabbat, 6 days and Shabbat, over and over and over again. These two are within 6 days. I mean, I don't know that they're in the same week, but but even like
Close
within
enough.
that period of creation, within the time that it took to create, they are both they are both located. And there's something that feels really significant and resonant with the point you are making about the 3 points. Like, I feel like what's in between is the teshuva and tikkun, between those two, if those are two bookends on a week. This is not a fully formed thought, because it's just
I'm with you.
processing as we're talking, but there's
I'm
something that feels really significant, and
juicy
I'd love to continue to kind of unpack what that would mean if acknowledging and lamenting our trauma is at the beginning and love is at the end, then teshuva and tikkun are in the middle, I think.
And it's perfect. And it's perfect for me in the context of how I think about and understand deep decolonized trauma healing. Around a core element of trauma healing is remembering our inherent goodness. And as we unpack traumas or different things that happen to us, having counselors and different supports who remind us of that goodness and help us reprogram and release the pain and shame and suffering most humans carry that is really not theirs to carry. It's around, particularly in childhood and also at other points in the context of oppression and other abusive dynamics, where someone else was hurt and they hurt us because of that. But our brains, especially when we're young and even when we're older, it's hard for us to, it doesn't make sense. Like violence and abuse is illogical. And so it makes sense that our brains would try to make sense. And usually it falls on us. And so to have that first step being teshuva, of returning back to our inherent divinity, and then reconciling, engaging in repair around pushing that forward in the context of all of this messaging and ingrained neural pathways that made us wrong for what happened. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. No, I mean, the way that the holiday has been given to us, there's a lot of commentary that says that each of these horrible moments of collective trauma were in some sense the Jews' fault for having done something to disobey or get in the way. There's lots of commentary around Tish B'Av that, I mean, that's part of.
And that's
anyway,
that's interesting. Like we could even, like, that's an interesting lens, because in general, even if I think certain things happen to folks or to myself, that there's a consequence of something that happened, this concept of fault, it feels oppressive to me. And I find that there are a number of mystical and spiritual beliefs and practices I engage in that other people don't. And the reason that they often give is because they think it's about fault finding. And these different practices I engage in, whether it's around energy healing or different things, or doing thought work to shift my experience, is not from a place of blame or, to me, it just reminds me of the carceral system. And again, which is what you were saying, back to that thought element, that thought error of, I need some reason. And it's a logical first thought to make something slightly less painful, to say, oh, they must have, or I must have done something to warrant this. And I'm not saying I'm opposed to that thought, but I also just want to share and push back around, like, even if our people did take a course of action that did contribute to that being a consequence, like, there's something about the fault implying potentially that we deserved. Well, or we deserved mistreatment and destruction and violence. I generally think much of the time, almost always, unless it's done mindfully and lovingly and in the healing capacity, which these things weren't, is not coming from a healthy place.
Is one of those moments from our tradition where I so deeply appreciate Mordecai Kaplan's instruction so the founder of the Reconstructionist movement,
yeah.
who told us that we must give the past a voice, but we don't need to give it a veto. And that's because what you are reacting to, it's built into the tradition. Our sages or different, commentators along the way, rabbinic commentators along the way, have certainly said that. In fact, in the 20th century, there were those among what is now the Orthodox community who said that the Shoah was because of reform. So there's always
because of Reformed Jews. When you say reform, I want to make sure that I understood what you were saying. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that particular picture of the divine that is required in order to make that kind of a statement does not resonate for me. I'm willing to say, like, okay, I heard you, but no, not taking that.
Yeah.
And in fact, that reading those when I was in grad school, I studied the early reform movement. And so reading those commentators who could say that we lost 6 million because God was mad about reform, that actually felt like a thing that one could say out loud, was part of my saying, like, yeah, nope.
Yeah. And there's depths of this that I'm not ready to share publicly, because I've done a lot of thinking about these elements as I consider these spiritual principles and stuff. But what I will say right now is that that's just not my perception. I think, one, it continues to evolve, but my spiritual metaphysical understanding of things is that God does not intercede in that way and smite people like that. Like, this is where our community is thinking, and it just doesn't feel good in my body. I don't know what it looks like. And I'm not saying that I am recommending this for folks right now, but this sort of thinking, to me, it has very limited value. And our community needs to find time and spaces to wail and cry and sob and all of this ideating. And I'm not saying it doesn't have any value, right? But there's a way in which that is not healing. It's an element of healing. And I think I've named this before, and I want to talk about it more and potentially build out programs or have us collaborate with different folks, Tracie, in terms of some of our other joyous justice work. In society in general, and definitely in our community, we mistake conceptualizing of trauma the same as healing from trauma. And conceptualizing of it or discussing it is an element of the healing. But blaming and pointing at the end of the day, we, like any other person, like any other child or any other person who has been dehumanized and targeted, deserves to be held and cherished and say, this is inconceivable. It was inconceivable. And I am so sorry this happened. And how can I hold you and support you? And how can we create a container within which you get to fall apart and process and cry and sob about how inconceivable this is, about all of the ways in your community and your family and the people who are closest to you, who you love, the way you see the shards of that trauma showing up in the brokenness and elements of the relationship and then the relationships in your life, right? And there's just a way in which there's something about it that feels not exclusively, but deeply patriarchal and oppressive and not helpful. Right? Like to accuse and to engage in blame. Like, to me, it's like the equivalent. Like, let's just take it out of this scenario and put it into another context, right? For some folks or sages to say that all of the Black folks who were kidnapped and dragged into the transatlantic slave trade and into slavery, that they some way like, it's just absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. Even, and I will share some of it now, even as I've been getting into the greater metaphysical depths of noticing and looking through my own living and in different stories and contexts of certain behaviors or ways of thinking that contribute in terms of the context of understanding, both metaphysically and also sociologically, in terms of deepening my understanding of oppressor patterns and oppressed patterns, and the belief, as Barbara Love teaches, like if you have two pegs holding up a table, there's the oppressor behaviors that maintain the oppression, and there's also the internalized oppressor patterns that maintain it, but not from a place of blame. So in some ways, even as I'm talking about, there might be something to that a little bit. But what I would say is that likely the people who are saying that, there were other Jews and other folks too who also experienced this. So it still lands, even if there is some shard of or shred of relevance in it. It's still, we still don't want to get into the fact that anyone ever deserved this, or that it was in any way that dehumanization is ever in any situation justified. Do you want to dive in here? Because I feel like there's like 5 different paths that I can go down here. And I think I opened up a bunch of loops.
I just want to name that I think it's really interesting, like what you're talking about, sort of the container and the chance to wail and just like honor it and be held. I feel
and
like
heal.
Tish B'Av has the potential to be that container, because a lot of the actual ritual around it is about lamentation and grief and expressing that grief. And so I think I find that really interesting, that both the less healthy and the more healthy manifestations, they coexist, which feels so relevant to just friggin' life.
Living.
Right?
Totally.
That's how life works.
Totally.
That the dysfunction and function kind of are constantly,
and in my mind,
present.
Right. And through my paradigm and through my visioning and what I'm thinking, and ideally people through a variety of different means are getting increasingly more nourishment and support and healing and empowerment and education, such that shifts more and more. That's been the experience in my life of continually striving and still having that dynamic, right? Instead of staying in the stuck place of it and being able to nourish and heal ourselves. So my sense is there's just an abundance. One, I think, to me, I hold, like, just as a world view, that there's actually a lot more good than bad, that people are inherently good. And so despite all of the dysfunction and just with the natural world alone, even with all the pollution, that our world is immense and just overflowing. Essentially, like, setting the oppression aside, it's gone Eden. It's the Garden of Eden. Like all of the flowers blooming and the bees buzzing and our oceans and the weather and all of these amazing things, right? So that is happening, right? And part of why I'm able to access joy and also rebound more quickly is because even as I'm experiencing different things, I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast before, my shorthand for it is babies, i.e. also brilliant leaders and amazing healers, are being born right now. Flowers are blooming, birds are singing. So, and somewhere in this world, though, and also times I include, and there are brilliant movement leaders. Like I'm experiencing a defeat or pain right now, and there are brilliant organizers and change makers all over the world who are connecting with each other right now, even as I am experiencing this thing. And that keeps me from going to a lower place that I could. Like those, I know rationally, those things are happening even as I'm feeling like it's all over, right? So back on track here with the Tish B'Av, what I want, or the idea that's coming to mind right now is that Tish B'Av would become a checkpoint day, would become a day to check in, to remember these different things, and would be the time to say, how has our journey been? Like, we're a couple months out or so from the high holidays, and that ideally in our community and over time and in the world in general, beyond just our community, we would have a plethora, middle school vocab word. We would have a huge, robust variety of easily and more increasingly accessible decolonized healing modalities that we would be engaging with daily and weekly and monthly. Because the collective trauma and the trauma even just from our own lives in the context of systemic oppression, let alone the intergenerational and collective trauma, is immense. So immense that one time a year is nowhere near sufficient. And if we just did it one time a year, and this is often what keeps people from engaging in more strategic, organized trauma healing work, is because the mountain of all of it combined is way too much for anybody or even a whole community to take on all at once, right? And so to me, Tish B'Av, ideally, building off of your idea, and I had a similar thought, but I was still trying to tinker with it, would be like, okay, here would be acknowledging what's happened and what's the journey we've been on for the year. And based upon the healing that we've gotten, how can we honor these things and also heal from them more in the coming year? There would be I'm envisioning like maps being rolled out, or like assessments, or different ways that we've measured different things and check it. And obviously it doesn't make sense to be that like whatever, like it could be more clinical. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that clinical. It could be more listening circles and sharing different things of what's been going well this year and how we feel more free from the sorrow, and also still where is it showing up in our living, and what of that feels worthwhile and we just want to hold on to, and what of that could we use support around releasing?
It's really interesting that
I'm so excited to hear what you have to say.
I was thinking along the same lines, though differently.
Please. Because what I'm saying, I don't think I actually want
different perspectives.
Yeah, and also what I'm saying, I don't think it's quite that. It's something that.
Well, I think there's also, I think part of where I'm coming at it differently is also just in the different ways, different comfort levels that you and I have with expressing big emotions.
Yes.
Right? Like,
please bring in this.
Part of me is thinking, like, when I was I don't know if I was in college or grad school, but I was a young adult, and like worry was taking over my life. And I remember my mom, who is so wise. So like I as I start to like give like, oh, my mom told me to do this, and my mom told me, and people are like, wow, that's really good. My mom is really good. And one of the things she told me to do was like, Trace, it's okay. Why don't you set a timer for 20 minutes and just worry your heart out? Just like worst case scenario it, and get it out of your system in those 20 minutes, and then you can move on. And I don't do this on the regular, but that is exactly what I needed back then, those 20 some years ago. But I'm thinking a little bit about, like, as someone who has a hard time because of the way I've been socialized, and maybe a little because of my personality, it's hard to tell what's nature and what's nurture. It's not easy for me to allow myself to feel big emotions, especially big negative emotions. Right. And so the idea that I could say like, okay, but on Tish B'Av,
right. Exactly.
Not only is it allowed, but it is encouraged. Like, that's my 20-minute timer for me to feel it's a 24-hour,
yes.
a 25-hour timer for me to feel all those feelings, which I have not allowed myself to feel about my own things, but also about the things that are sitting back there in history, all the ones that I named and all the others, right? From my people and from all peoples. And to your point that one day is not enough, I agree.
And the pressure.
And also, but also from where I stand, where I am right now, like, I don't know how much more I could take given how hard it is for me to do. And so what I'm thinking actually is that in the world to come, right, in Olam Haba, we don't need Tish B'Av anymore.
Yeah, now you get radical.
Not because we've forgotten those things, but because we've healed from them.
Yes.
And we are able to just feel the feelings when we need to feel them and move on. Right. So we don't need that 20-minute timer that my mom offered me for worry, because we're able to just feel them, release them, and move on. So that's where I went while you were talking, from my like very like straight-laced.
So I have two thoughts I want to share.
Socialized and also
out of order, starting most recent with what you most said, and then going back to another point is, and for me, and I totally agree with you, but I want to achieve that in my lifetime. To me, it's not about Olam Haba. I want to figure, because to me, this is like, what is keeping it? Like, this is the magic bullet. Not that there is an actual magic bullet, but this is like oppression is not bigger than us. People think it is, but oppression actually lives in different people. And to Barbara Love's point, as we heal from internalized oppression, a number of these things are going to greatly lose their power, right? A huge part of it is how we conform to it because of our conditioning. And again, not blame. These were things that were put on to us, right? The ways that we were programmed and conditioned. But through healing and nourishment and different resourcing, we can show up differently and make different choices, right? Then the other thing that I wanted to say to your point, which I also agree with about all of it, that the way that we are living right now, and I actually like that there is a marker to acknowledge what the truth of the trauma and oppression that our people has experienced. I think that is useful to have Tish B'Av, and I think it needs to be buttressed and supported by work year round around this, where it's taken down into bite-sized portions that's similar, but doesn't have to be exactly the same with what different elements of my decolonized counter-oppressive trauma healing looks like, right? Where I have a couple calls a week with trauma peer counselors. And in the mornings now lately for the last couple weeks now, when it's getting integrated, is I do meditation. And at times while I'm doing meditation, if I feel stuff emerging in my body, I've been learning different somatic techniques. And I also engage in somatic trauma release while I'm continuing to do my breathing. And at times, and much of the time when it's somatic, I'm not even conscious about what it is, which is actually kind of great. I'm not remembering the specific incident. My body is surfacing trauma that it's been holding on to, that it now feels safe enough to let go of and let me shake or do other things, right? And as you were talking about the one day thing, and in one of the books I read, I can look it up later. It was like it was a book that was helpful for me that talked about different habits and things. There was a story in it about taking daily imperfect action, and a case study where this professor he decided to do a test, and he like split half his class, and one half of the class, they could do whatever they wanted during the semester, and they would just be graded on their final photograph. It was a photography class. And the other half had to take a photo every day, and then had to select one of the photos that they took every day from that, right? And as you can guess where this is going, the folks who had to take a photo every day, the caliber of the one photo they chose was wildly better. At times I wonder if this story is true, because it kind of stinks for the students who weren't set up for success in that way. I don't know if I let them choose, but when they were just in that thinking space, which this is a great parallel for what I was trying to say earlier about healing and trauma work, is that when we put it all in one container and are ideating and talking about it here and there and doing an occasional thing, as opposed to just doing something that is embodied and, brings relief, noticing I'm feeling anxiety. Can I start with what's happening in this moment? And can I bring myself relief? Okay, I'm having memories come up. Can I get support around this? And that looks like a lot of different things. I want to access any number of modalities, traditional, earth-based, not traditional, otherwise, that can help us with that, and breaking it down into smaller bits and parts, such that when we come to Tish B'Av, it can be a moment of overall reflection and like a milestone around, whoa, there are these different things. I've really been doing deep work around this. Do I want to keep on that path, or do I want to look at this element? I've been really focusing on my journey. Do I want to focus my attention on supporting other elements of my community and continuing to heal?
What I wanted to continue to pull on and bring back to some of the resonance is that there is a fast associated with Tish B'Av, which is an embodied.
Great point.
Now it's legislated, but it's an embodied form of expressing grief in this case. And there are those, to what we were talking about before, there are those who see it as, afflicting oneself in a form of penance, which is a way of Christian talking about it, but in the same way we do for Yom Kippur. But ultimately, in my mind, it's always been a fast of
emptying,
as opposed to of atonement, which is really, I hadn't sort
I
of
like this,
articulated that nuance even to myself until we are having this conversation. But I'm thinking about like what you're talking about the somatic and the different ways of processing through your body, some of the things. As I, well, so if you didn't know, listeners, you know now, I am recovering from COVID. And so I had to take, I mean, I have great coworkers and a great boss who were like, just rest, stop working. And I'm glad that they did. And I did rest, and I didn't do my regular exercise routine because that just wasn't happening. And I found that as I was starting to feel better, I had this restlessness that was mind, body, and spirit. Like this, just like, whoa, like I just felt yucky. I don't have like, there's my articulateness. That I just felt out of sorts, and I felt it as like a tightness in my chest and a fogginess in my thinking, and just a restlessness in my soul almost. And it was because I hadn't moved my body in 6 days. And I'm anyway, I'm not even 100% sure where I'm going with this, except that I love what you're saying about the importance of the body and the mind and the spirit, and how they're all tied in doing this healing work. And I like it that the container we have been given for Tish B'Av for grieving also contains the embodied practice, whether or not I choose to make it an actual fast from food. If, you know, for however I decide to use Tish B'Av this year, which now I'm going to put a lot of thought into over the next week. I like the idea that our ancestors and our predecessors have, you know, acknowledged on this day of lamentation and grief, there is work for the body to do, in addition to the spirit and the mind. And so that I'm kind of glomming onto that right now.
And the last couple pieces that I would add before we draw this episode to a close is that super resonates. And again, I'm not into the punishment model at all. I just don't think it's helpful in general. And so in terms of analysis of certain things, so fasting for me, and also someone who engages in daily fasting where I mostly eat one meal a day, and I hydrate throughout the day and take different vitamins and stuff, that there's release involved in that when you're not giving an input and you're just releasing, right? There's a clearing that happens of our system, and it also allows our different organs to rest and repair, have more time to repair and heal. And the other thing that I would notice as you were saying this, I'm just noticing different things, that a part of the digestive tract goes through the hip and sacral chakra. And that's a core place where trauma is held, is in the hips and chakra. So I also like how the overlay of fasting involves several of those, passes through that area and zone of healing. And then the other piece that I wanted to add is a very personal share that, you know, I had this huge spiritual breakthrough in November, Tracie, you know, where around the time of my grandma's approaching passing, where I was meditating 3 to 4 hours a day. And what I've recently realized, and I've been meditating and or a wannabe meditator, or a constantly lapsed meditator since my sophomore or freshman year in college. So almost 20 years now. And I noticed, I'm just going to go full woo for a second here. I've been learning about human design and for another day, but I'm a mental projector. And one of the elements of my being is that all of my chakras are open from the neck down, and I receive energy. And so I was just recently realizing, as I've been ascending and meditating over the past few days, that's why when I was with groups of experienced meditators, I had these euphoric experiences, because I could tap into their energy flow. But when I was alone, while I still loved the idea and I did get some relief out of it, I couldn't do it for long, and I had time approaching it. And I've just recently realized, which is this huge thing that I keep saying it over and over again, when you're struggling with something, and it's not, sometimes it's slightly more complicated, but almost always it's because there's either unhealed trauma and or you need help with it, right? And I just recently realized that through a specific modality that I learned through Dawson Church, this science meditation researcher, where he has guided meditations that involve EFT freedom, that involve tapping. And as I started to do that, and do it for an extended period, I started burping a lot, which in different modalities is associated either with relaxation and or the release of terror and fear, internalized fear. And I actually think those are intertwined, that as your body relaxes, it can release terror, terror in the body. And so all of this to say, I've become a much more effective meditator as I've started to do different somatic release pieces. And so I just wanted to share that insight, that I thought that for folks, if you haven't resonated with meditation, and there are lots of people in my life for whom traditional meditation doesn't work, if it's something that you want to explore or some other similar piece, you might want to look into, I like TikTok and different creators and somatic practitioners on TikTok, because they make little videos where they teach you some of these core things that have been hard for me to access, right? I know it's funny, right? But it's true. I didn't say it before because I was embarrassed to say it, but it's true. I've found different somatic practitioners who have made, who have demystified and made certain things readily available. And as I'm doing them, I'm getting even more release, in addition to my more verbal and emotive trauma healing modalities. And so I wanted to share that as you're talking in terms of embodiment, that the embodied piece, and this is coming up for me in multiple themes now. Last year, it was a big theme around my brain health, from meditation, diet, getting omega-3. And right now, one of the big themes is around even more embodying my healing. And so when you say that about, I really love what you highlighted basically about fasting and it having an embodied component. And so I would invite you, beloved listener, one, just to thank you for listening to this point. We love you so much. And also to say that for you to consider too, as Tracie modeled that she would, and I align with that too, whether it's nourishing yourself and or engaging vigorously in some athletic activity, if that brings you life, or doing something in between, just engaging in play or creation. On Tish B'Av, might you consider, or just doing a traditional fast or somewhere in between, what's an embodied practice you might do where you may consider these things? And earlier, I didn't mean to imply that obviously we need to have great analysis around this, but when we have analysis at the exclusion of allowing ourselves to feel some of our feelings, and in time, ideally more of them, with support and with community and partnership and chevruta, and also to explore embodied experience with this. Are there certain clothes that you want to wear? Are there certain ways you want to touch your body or have somebody else touch your body? Do you want to access, if you're in a place where you can, access more hugs on that day? Engage in touch in healthy, consensual ways. That's the invitation.
Yeah. I'm going to say this
please.
Again, I'm going to reflect this back for the way that I'm thinking
Please.
about it, just in case this is helpful. I am going to be thinking about how I can access the technology that is my body to help me feel my feelings, to help me more fully feel my feelings, acknowledge them, and just let them exist instead of pushing them down, as I often
do. To feel and or like witness
that,
or acknowledge, right, as a first step.
Yeah. Just letting them be, because usually I am one to have feelings about my feelings and say I shouldn't be feeling such and such a way, and try and stop feeling such and such a way, which is
how
not
nearly
not
everyone
helpful.
in America has been conditioned.
Yeah, I think we all do that. And I, for one, am looking for ways to do less of that, and forgive myself and just witness and be. So I'm going to look for ways my body can help support that happening.
Because our motion
for Tish B'Av.
To add it in, because why not? Because I'm just more and more clear that our emotion and our capacity to manage and acknowledge our emotions is a huge potential source of power. It's not just about healing. On the other side of that healing is the more we have capacity to feel these different things and or access certain energy flows throughout our system, which is our feelings or in our emotions, the more power and courage and resilience we have access to. And incrementally, even if we do this just little bits at a time, the more we get to regain elements of our thinking and our humanity that have been in a chronic state of pain and or frozenness from the trauma that hasn't been able to be healed. And the more we start to gain elasticity, literally in our brain and in our being, the better, the stronger, and the more fulfilled we can be, and the more space we will have for love. Much love, y'all. See you for Tu B'Av. Thanks for tuning in. Our show's theme music was composed by Elliot Hammer. You can find this track and other beats on Instagram at Elliot Hammer. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. To join the conversation, visit JewsTalkRacialJustice.com, where you can send us a question or suggestion, access our show notes, and learn more about our team. Take care until next time, and stay humble and keep going.